Chapter 12. Catwalk. "Park right there," Hanson ordered, pointing to a spot. Slap, who was driving, nodded that he understood. He began braking rather abruptly to kill their excess speed. The drive from the hill to their current parking spot, 2 blocks from East Swift City High School, took about 20 minutes from the moment they decided to leave the hill overlooking Fort Sandlin. Hanson wanted to have Slap speed, but it seemed best to drive within a reasonable range of the speed limit. They didn't want to draw unnecessary attention. Their military vehicle stood out enough on its own without the added attention getter of blazing through city streets at 50 miles per hour. Slap pulled into the spot Hanson indicated, placing them directly behind a large SUV. From there, they could see the upper floors of the school, but not much else. They were about 2 blocks west of the school. Hanson figured this would be far enough away to ensure they didn't stand out. Obviously, pulling up to the front door would have been a bad idea. "Winters, I could really use a status report on ESCHS if you're not busy," Hanson said over his radio. He was hoping that 20 minutes provided enough time for her to cool off. After a long pause, she answered in her "I'm still pissed off, but I'm going to help you anyway because I'm a better person than you" voice. "The ESCHS task force will be ready to leave in 5 minutes. They should get to the school in about 20 minutes. Also, not that you asked, but Damocles hasn't attacked the base yet." "Thanks, Winters. Have the reinforcements stand by in front of the school. Weapons at the ready when they get here," Hanson said. His radio clicked, signaling that she acknowledged what he said, but that she wasn't going to bother with an actual response. He found that to be slightly amusing. Then he turned his attention to the guys next to him. He quickly looked each of them in the eyes, one right after the other. They each gave him a nod that clearly signified they were ready to make things happen. He nodded back. Then he climbed out of the vehicle. He headed to the trunk where he grabbed his rifle. Not the massive 50 cal he was using earlier, but his much smaller 5.56 assault rifle. He was glad he decided to bring it with him. It was going to come in handy for what he was planning next. While the rest of the guys were getting out, he did a few quick stretches. He was steeling himself for what he was about to attempt. It wouldn't fly to bust into the school, grab Aurora, and get the hell out of there. That would certainly save face with Cesar, but it would be a PR nightmare for the SCDF. ESCHS had kids from probably a third of the city at least. If he only got Aurora out alive, he'd have a lot of pissed off parents to deal with if they survived the impending Damocles attack. With snatch and grab off the table, Hanson's small team really only had one good option left. They were going to need to take down all of the Damocles thugs who were in the school. They were going to do this before reinforcements showed up. On the surface, it seemed a bit foolhardy, and Winters certainly wouldn't approve, but Hanson figured the longer they waited, the larger the chance the thugs would barricade the place, or Damocles would attack Fort Sandlin. Either option would be detrimental to him getting Aurora out of the school alive, so despite the long odds, it was best to strike as soon as possible. He wasn't entirely sure what Damocles was planning to do with the hostages they had. He was pretty sure they were intended as diversions to draw the SCDF out of Fort Sandlin, but he wasn't sure if they were actually planning on killing innocent civilians. The logic behind his confusion was pretty simple. If Damocles wanted to take over the city, it would be a lot easier if they didn't murder a bunch of innocent bystanders. Killing kids would be an even worse look for Damocles than killing adults. It was a classical dilemma, the kind Hanson was trained to deal with rationally. If Damocles was going to kill the hostages anyway, then the hostages were a sunk cost, and there was little to no point in spending resources attempting to save them. This was especially true when the greater population of Swift City was at risk. However, if there was a chance of saving the hostages, then these operations became an exercise of balancing trade-offs. The more troops stationed back at base, the higher the probability of successfully repelling a Damocles attack. If Damocles took out the SCDF, the city would fall and everyone would probably die. So the question was if a higher chance of saving a few hostages was worth a lower chance of saving the whole city. This question was precisely why Hanson opted to send only 20 troops to each potential diversion location. He didn't even issue orders for the soldiers to act when they reached their targets. Winters was supposed to relay that upon arrival. The soldiers were supposed to surround the buildings and wait. In other words, they were a diversion to the diversion. The idea was to make Damocles think that the SCDF took the bait without actually committing the required forces to resolve the hostage problem. Now that he was heading to one of the hostage situations himself, the mental math was a bit different. Instead of trying to wait the situation out to save resources for the main attack, it was now in his best interest to get this particular incident resolved as quickly as possible. The last thing he wanted was to be inside his school, locked in a shootout while Damocles was attacking Fort Sandlin with their main attack force. That would be the definition of a worst-case scenario for today. To avoid that, it was best to get this done as quickly and efficiently as possible. Alright boys, just like we discussed in the way. Hitchens, you're with me. Slap and Condor, get the rifle set up somewhere you can see the main entrance. Whatever you do, don't shoot any civilians, especially no kids. That would be a disaster. Hanson gave his quick pep talk. As a sign of acknowledgement, Slap and Condor pulled the 50 cal rifle out of the back of the vehicle. They headed down the street towards an alley that ran north of where they parked. While they were doing that, Hitchens checked his rifle and then looked at Hanson. "Lead the way, Major," he said grimly. He knew what was coming. Hanson nodded. He started off towards the school. He did his best to move quickly but not suspiciously. He kept his rifle tucked at waist level. This didn't hide it very well, but it made it slightly less obvious that he was heavily armed. He didn't want to raise any extra suspicion if a bystander saw Hitchens and him running towards the school. Hitchens, for his part, followed his lead. He too kept his rifle at waist level. The grouping Hanson selected was based on relative experience. Slap and Condor were as green as soldiers came. They both did basic training, but beyond that, neither of them served through any active duty tours. Hitchens, on the other hand, did one tour of duty. Hanson was banking heavily on the hope that Hitchens would still remember how to clear rooms. Lives would probably depend on it. Hanson visited East Swift City High School only once before. It was part of a STEM Day event. The colonel thought Hanson was a perfect example of a military-funded engineering education. At the time, he hadn't been terribly thrilled about participating in the event. He wasn't a ride-or-die army guy. He was proud of his service, and he wouldn't pick a different path if given a do-over, but at the same time, he knew for a fact that military service wasn't for the faint of heart. He didn't like recruiting events because he felt like modern-day kids were, well, wimps. Now it was looking like the recruiting event would turn out to be a blessing in disguise. He still roughly remembered what the layout of the school was like. Like most schools in the US, ESCHS was rather blocky. From the air, it resembled a long short rectangle on top of a tall rectangle on top of an oval. The oval was the school's track and field. North of the track was the gymnasium, and north of the gymnasium were the actual classrooms. Hanson suspected the hostages were being held in the gymnasium. If he was going to take hostages at a school with just a 5-man team, that's where he would put the hostages. Overall, it would be a far better plan to break up the hostages into 5 groups, with each group being located at a different end of the school. This would make it the most difficult for the SCDF to free them, however, it presented another problem that would be a greater concern. Crowd control would be the major issue. There were too many corners and too many variables. That's why Hanson figured the gym made the most sense. The gym was a massive open room designed to maximize visibility for the audience. That worked both ways, which made it pretty easy to corral a bunch of people into one area where it would be easier to keep an eye on everyone. If Hanson was the hostage taker, he'd get everyone to the gym, station 3 guys at the entrances, and leave 2 guys to watch the kids. Damocles was likely equipped with fully automatic weapons, the kind that would make quick work out of unarmored children. Hanson grimaced at the thought of a tragedy like that, and gave him a strong urge to start sprinting. But he kept his speed walk pace. As he and Hitchens approached the school, they slowed down to what could be described as a painfully casual walk. The gym towered a few hundred feet in front of them. It was a massive building. Inside, there were 2 levels of seating that could easily handle several thousand people. Their destination was tucked up against the eastern exterior wall of the gym. Hanson was initially worried their destination didn't exist, but he was hopeful, and his hope paid off. On the east side of the gym, there was a long, shrouded ladder that ascended to the roof. The base of the ladder was surrounded by a tall chain-link fence intended to keep the unauthorized masses from getting onto the roof. When he saw it, he felt the slightest sensation of relief. If there hadn't been external roof access, they were going to have to go in through the front door. A prospect that would have been very messy, no doubt. When Hanson was last in the gym, he passively observed that there were a bunch of catwalks spanning most of the ceiling. He didn't recall seeing any ladders running up to them inside the gym, which meant there must be another way to reach them. With any luck, there would be some sort of roof hatch that he and Hitchens could use to get on to those catwalks. That was the plan, at least. A plan that was looking pretty good so far. The chain link fence had a small gate which they were headed for. When they reached it, Hanson was unsurprised to find a very large padlock holding the gate shut. While he began examining it, Hitchens looked around. Unless someone was looking for them, it was unlikely that anyone spotted them approaching. It'd be faster to hop the fence, Hanson said, half to himself, after he finished examining the lock. Without saying a word, Hitchens swung his rifle behind him. He cupped his hands and stood right next to the fence, giving Hanson a nice step about 3 feet off the ground. Hanson did the same with his rifle. Then, in one fluid motion, he stepped on the makeshift step and jumped. At the same time, Hitchens heaved upward to give Hanson a bit of an extra boost. It proved to be more than enough, allowing Hanson to grab the top of what was probably a 10-foot fence. With some muffled grunting, he managed to pull himself up over the fence. Once he was balanced on the top, he spun around and extended a hand to Hitchens. While he was doing this, he took care to make sure he was balancing on the hardened steel plate in his bullet-resistant vest. He had zero desire to get stabbed by the little wire fence points on the top of the fence. Hitchens jumped once, twice, and then a third time. Each time, he reached out for Hanson's outstretched hand. He got it on the third jump. Hanson heaved hard while Hitchens used his free hand and boot tips to scale the fence. It took a lot of effort, but after about 2 minutes, both Hanson and Hitchens were breathing hard on the top of the fence. "You ready for this?" Hanson asked while he slowly lowered himself to the ground. A second after Hitchens landed, he said, "Yeah, but we should go over your plan one more time. I'm still not convinced you're not batshit crazy." "I'm not convinced either," Hanson admitted. "The plan," he continued, "is to use this ladder here," he gestured to the ladder next to them, "to climb onto the roof. From there, we'll hopefully find some sort of roof access that'll get us in and onto the catwalks. After that, I'll sneak down to the second level while you stay on the catwalks providing overwatch. When I give the signal, we'll take out the Damocles thugs." "Yeah, that's a pretty tall order," Hitchens held up his rifle. "This thing here isn't exactly a precision weapon, Major. This is a standard optic on a standard rifle being used with standard ammo by a standard soldier." "Well, do you want to climb down while I provide overwatch?" Hanson asked. "No," Hitchens sighed. "All right, then when I give the signal, put the dot on the center of the bad guy and pull the trigger. That's the best we can do at this point, Hitchens. Either we do this with the element of surprise now, or we turn it into a complete flustercluck when the cavalry shows up," Hanson grumbled. Now was not the time for second guessing. Hitchens didn't answer. He just nodded. Satisfied, Hanson nodded back. They both understood what they were dealing with. Then they started climbing up the side of the gym. As they climbed, Hanson thought, "Hopefully there's a door up there and the kids are in the gym. Otherwise, I'm going to be quite discouraged. I wonder what Winters is doing now. She hasn't said anything for a bit."